I still remember the day I met Rachel. It was at a friend's party, one of those casual get-togethers where everyone knows each other. I wasn't planning on meeting anyone that night, just hanging out with some old friends, having a few drinks and catching up on life. But when Rachel walked in, everything changed. She had this magnetic energy that made heads turn as soon as she entered the room. Long, flowing brown hair, eyes that sparkled with curiosity, and a laugh that was contagious. It felt like the whole world slowed down for a moment when our eyes met across the room. She smiled, and I felt something stir inside me, a feeling I hadn't experienced in a long time. That night, we talked for hours, forgetting about the crowd around us. She had this infectious enthusiasm for life, a love for adventure, and this easygoing nature that drew me in instantly. By the end of the night, we exchanged numbers, and it wasn't long before we started dating. It was the kind of relationship that felt too good to be true at first. She was sweet, funny, caring, and we shared a lot of common interests, traveling, hiking, even the same taste in music. We dated for about 2 years before I decided to pop the question. Everything seemed perfect. We traveled the world together, laughed together, built memories, and made promises. She seemed like the one. I saved up for months to buy the perfect engagement ring, planning the most romantic proposal I could imagine. We had a weekend trip planned in the mountains, one of our favorite places. I figured it was the ideal setting for such a life-changing moment. The proposal was flawless, underneath a canopy of stars, surrounded by the sound of nature. She said yes, tears in her eyes, and I couldn't have been happier. For a while, everything was perfect. We started planning our wedding, and I felt like I was living in a dream. We had everything figured out, the venue, the guest list, the music, and even our vows. I was so ready to start the rest of my life with Rachel. But then things started to change. At first, it was subtle. She became distant, her enthusiasm for the wedding planning faded, and she seemed distracted more often than not. I chalked it up to wedding stress. After all, planning a big event like that could get overwhelming. But something didn't sit right with me. I tried brushing it off, but there was a nagging feeling that something was off. We had always been open with each other, but now she was spending more time on her phone, constantly messaging someone, and whenever I asked, she just said it was wedding related. I tried to ignore the feeling, but it kept gnawing at me. One evening, as we were watching a movie, she left her phone on the couch and went to the kitchen to grab a drink. The phone buzzed, and I instinctively glanced at it. A message from someone named Chris popped up on the screen, and it wasn't the kind of message you'd expect from a friend. My heart sank. At first, I didn't want to believe it. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe Chris was an old friend or a cousin I hadn't heard about. But deep down, I knew. I had to find out the truth. The next day, while Rachel was at work, I did something I never thought I'd do. I went through her phone. And there it was, dozens of messages, pictures, plans. She had been seeing Chris for months behind my back. They met up when I was away for work, they made excuses to sneak around, and she lied to my face every single time. My world came crashing down in that moment. Everything we had built, every memory, every promise, it was all a lie. I was furious. But more than that, I was hurt. I had given her everything. My love, my trust, my heart. And she had thrown it all away like it meant nothing. I could have confronted her right then and there, but no. I wanted her to feel the same level of betrayal, the same hurt, the same shock that I felt in that moment. I knew what I had to do. I decided to wait. The wedding was only a month away, and I figured, what better way to expose her than on the day she least expected it? I wanted her to feel the humiliation, the embarrassment, the weight of her betrayal in front of everyone we knew. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about making sure she understood the gravity of what she had done. The month leading up to the wedding was excruciating. Every time I looked at her, I felt disgusted. But I kept up appearances, pretending like everything was normal. We continued with the wedding plans, sent out the invitations, finalized the details. All the while, I was planning something else. My big reveal. The day of the wedding arrived, and I was eerily calm. I wasn't nervous about standing in front of all our friends and family. I wasn't excited about marrying the woman I once thought I loved. I was focused on one thing, exposing her for the cheater she was. The ceremony was beautiful, exactly what we had planned. The venue was perfect, the decoration stunning, and everyone was there, smiling, laughing, celebrating what they thought was the happiest day of our lives. Rachel looked stunning in her dress, and for a brief moment, I almost forgot what I was about to do. But then I remembered Chris, the lies, the betrayal, and my resolve hardened. We exchanged vows, her voice trembling with emotion as she promised to love and cherish me for the rest of her life. It was all I could do not to laugh at the irony. When it was my turn, I took a deep breath and began my speech. But instead of the vows I had written months ago, I said something else entirely. I've been waiting for this day for a long time, I started. Not because I'm excited to marry Rachel, but because I've been waiting for the perfect moment to tell all of you the truth. Rachel's smile faltered, and she looked at me, confused. The guests were silent, sensing that something was off. For the past few months, Rachel has been seeing someone else. His name is Chris. While I was planning our future together, she was sneaking around behind my back, lying to me, betraying me. Gasps filled the room. Rachel's face turned pale, her eyes wide with shock. I found out weeks ago, I continued. And I've been waiting for this moment to let her know that I won't be marrying her today. I won't be marrying a liar, a cheater. You see, Rachel, I thought you were the love of my life. But now, I see you for who you really are. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she tried to speak, but I cut her off. I don't need to hear your excuses. I'm done. With that, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there in front of everyone, humiliated and alone. As I walked out of the venue, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I didn't feel victorious or triumphant. I felt free. Free from the lies, the deceit, the heartbreak. Rachel had made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. In the days that followed, I heard through mutual friends that Rachel tried to reach out, but I ignored every attempt. There was nothing left to say. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. As the days passed, the reality of what I had discovered started to sink in. Each time I replayed that image in my mind, the sight of my fiancé in someone else's arms, it felt like a fresh wound reopening. The betrayal weighed heavily on my heart, but the anger, the sheer frustration, was beginning to take over. Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, to throw everything out in the open and let her face the consequences. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something. A mere confrontation wouldn't be enough. No, this kind of betrayal deserved something bigger. Something more lasting. The wedding was fast approaching, and that's when it hit me. What if I turned the wedding day itself into the ultimate payback? She wouldn't see it coming. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it. I wasn't ready to talk to anyone yet. Not friends, not family, and definitely not her. As I stood there lost in thought, I heard footsteps approaching. I tensed for a moment, expecting someone to come out and either berate me for ruining the wedding or try to convince me to go back inside and make amends. But when I turned around, it was just my best man, Mike. He had this look on his face, half in shock, half impressed. He didn't say anything at first, just leaned against the tree next to me, mirroring my position. After a few moments of silence, he let out a low whistle. "Well," he finally said, "that was one hell of a show." I chuckled, despite everything. "You think?" Mike shrugged. "I mean, I knew you had something planned, but I didn't expect that." I glanced at him, raising an eyebrow. "What did you think I was going to do? Just walk away quietly?" He laughed, shaking his head. "Nah, man. I know you too well for that. But still, I didn't expect you to go full mic drop in front of everyone." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "It had to be done." "Yeah, but damn. You could have just told her privately. You didn't have to blow it up like that." I frowned, turning to look at him. "Do you really think she deserved that? After everything she did?" Mike was quiet for a moment, then shrugged again. "I'm not saying she didn't deserve it. I don't know, man. It was brutal." "That's the point," I said, my voice harder than I intended. "She needed to feel it. She needed to know what it was like to be blindsided like I was." Mike didn't respond for a while, just stared off into the distance. Eventually, he pushed himself off the tree and clapped me on the shoulder. "Well, whatever happens next, you did what you thought was right. And honestly, I can't say I wouldn't have done the same thing." I nodded, appreciating the support. "Thanks, man." He gave me a small smile before walking back toward the reception hall, leaving me alone with my thoughts once again. As I stood there, I couldn't help but think about the irony of it all. I had once dreamed of this day, of standing beside the woman I loved, celebrating our future together. But instead, it had turned into a public execution of sorts, a symbolic severing of ties that could never be mended. I felt a pang of sadness wash over me. Despite everything, despite the anger and betrayal, part of me still missed her. The woman I had fallen in love with wasn't the one who had betrayed me. At least, that's what I told myself. But deep down, I knew that the woman who had made me feel so safe, so loved, had been a lie all along. The wedding had been a facade, just like our relationship. And now that facade had crumbled, leaving only the raw truth behind. I sighed, pulling out my phone. There were several missed calls from friends, probably trying to check on me, to see if I was okay. I scrolled through the messages, most of them saying things like, "Are you serious? And what the hell happened?" But one message stood out. It was from her. She had texted me, despite everything. "Please," it said. "Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen. What could she possibly want to say? What could she even say that would make a difference now? But against my better judgment, I opened the message and typed a reply. "There's nothing left to talk about." And with that, I put my phone away and walked toward my car. It was over. I got into my car, and the silence was almost deafening. For a moment, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the dashboard. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, and in its place, a dull ache began to settle in my chest. The weight of everything that had just happened was sinking in, but so was the overwhelming sense of finality. It's done. There's no going back. I took a deep breath and started the engine, the low hum filling the void of silence. I wasn't sure where I was headed, but I knew I needed to get away from the scene of the emotional wreckage I had just caused. Driving aimlessly for a while seemed like the best option. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced in the rearview mirror at the venue where the wedding should have taken place. The decorations, the guests, the laughter, they were all still inside, but I had left behind a completely different scene. It felt surreal, like watching a slow-motion disaster unfold, only I had been the one to initiate it. For a long time, I just drove. The roads blurred together as my mind raced, replaying everything that had happened. Part of me was relieved that the truth was finally out, that I didn't have to pretend anymore. But another part of me felt hollow. Was this how I wanted it to end? I pulled off the highway at a rest stop and parked the car. My phone buzzed again, and against my better judgment, I checked it. More messages, people still processing what had just happened, more missed calls. But I ignored them. What was done was done. As I leaned back in my seat, memories flooded my mind. I remembered how it had all started, the excitement, the love, the feeling that we were going to be together forever. But somewhere along the way, the cracks had begun to show. Small things at first, strange behavior, unanswered questions. Then the lies. Then the betrayal. I had found out by accident. A message she hadn't meant for me to see, a conversation that had taken place behind my back. And then, when I confronted her, the truth came tumbling out. She had been cheating for months, maybe longer. I never really got the full story, and by that point, I didn't even care. All I knew was that the person I thought I loved wasn't who I thought she was. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself, it was the realization that everything I had believed about our relationship had been a lie. The person I had trusted more than anyone had been living a double life, and I had been too blind to see it. And now here I was, sitting in my car, after exposing her in front of all our family and friends. Was it worth it? The question nagged at me, even though I knew the answer. Yes, it was worth it. I had given her too much power over me for too long. This was my moment to take back control, to show her, and everyone else, that I wasn't going to be walked over. She had broken my heart, but I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I checked my phone again, scrolling through the endless messages. People were shocked. Some were angry. Others were supportive. But amidst all the noise, one message caught my eye again. It was her. Please. I didn't mean for it to end this way. Can we just talk? I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the screen. First time I had suspected something was off. It had been a small thing, really. A missed call she couldn't explain. A sudden, unexplained girls' night out. I had wanted to believe her excuses, and for a while I had. It wasn't until I found that message on her phone, one she had carelessly left unlocked, that the reality of the situation hit me. I could still feel the sickening pit in my stomach when I read those words. The casual conversation between her and someone I had never heard of, talking about their plans. It wasn't just the cheating that hurt, it was the casualness of it. The way she had lied to my face and acted like everything was normal. Like our future wasn't about to implode. I had confronted her, of course. I tried to stay calm, but my voice was shaking as I asked her to explain. I had hoped for some kind of misunderstanding, some explanation that would clear it all up. But her face had gone pale, and I knew right then and there that the truth was far worse than I had imagined. And I had given her a taste of the betrayal I had experienced. I had taken back my power in the only way I knew how, and despite the fallout, I couldn't regret that. The days turned into weeks, and as time passed, I started to feel the weight of everything settle in. The immediate shock of the wedding had subsided, but the lingering effects were still there, simmering beneath the surface. I hadn't seen Sarah since that day, and the silence between us felt like a wide chasm that could never be crossed again. As Emily and I continued spending time together, I began to notice the small things, the way her laugh could brighten any room, her thoughtful nature, and the ease with which we could talk about anything and everything. It felt refreshing to be around someone who understood me so well, someone who didn't carry the baggage of my recent past but still cared enough to listen when I needed to vent. One evening, after dinner at a quiet little restaurant, Emily looked at me with a serious expression. "I've been thinking," she said, stirring her drink absent-mindedly, "about what you went through with Sarah." I tensed slightly, not really wanting to dive into that again, but her soft tone reassured me. "What about it?" I asked. "You didn't deserve that," she said firmly. "The way she betrayed you, and how everything went down, it wasn't fair. And I know it's not easy to move on from something like that, but I just want you to know, you deserve better." Her words hung in the air between us, and for a moment, I wasn't sure how to respond. It was something I had been telling myself for months, but hearing it from someone else, especially someone like Emily, made it feel more real. "Thanks," I said after a long pause. "It means a lot, really. I'm trying to move on, but some days are harder than others." She smiled, a little sadly, and reached across the table to take my hand. "I know. But you're doing better than you think. And I'm here, okay? Whatever you need." It was a simple gesture, but it meant the world to me in that moment. For the first time since everything had fallen apart with Sarah, I felt like I wasn't alone in navigating the aftermath. As the months passed, my relationship with Emily grew stronger. What had started as casual hangouts turned into something more, though neither of us had explicitly labeled it. There was no rush, no pressure, just an unspoken understanding that we were both happy where things were heading. Of course, life still threw its challenges my way. Every now and then, I would see a post or hear something about Sarah, and those familiar pangs of anger and hurt would surface. But they didn't last as long anymore. With each passing day, the sting of betrayal faded a little more, replaced by the warmth of new memories I was building with Emily. One afternoon, while we were sitting on a park bench watching the sunset, Emily turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about how things could have been different? Like, if you hadn't found out about Sarah the way you did?" I thought about it for a moment before shaking my head. "Sometimes, yeah. But honestly, I'm glad I found out when I did. As painful as it was, I think it would have been worse if it had come out later, after we were married. I would have been even more devastated." She nodded, seeming to understand. "I get that. And I guess in a weird way, it was a blessing in disguise, right? I mean, it brought us back together." I smiled, realizing just how true that was. "Yeah, I guess it did. Funny how life works out sometimes." The truth was, I didn't regret a single thing. Everything that had happened with Sarah, as horrible as it was, had ultimately led me to where I was now. And where I was now, with Emily by my side, was exactly where I wanted to be. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over everything. In that moment, I felt a deep sense of peace, something I hadn't felt in a long time. The pain of the past hadn't completely disappeared, but it no longer defined me. I had learned, I had grown, and most importantly, I had found happiness again. As the last rays of sunlight faded away, Emily leaned her head on my shoulder. "So," she said softly, "what's next for us?" I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing for sure. "Whatever it is," I replied, "I'm ready for it." And for the first time in a long time, I truly meant it. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself reflecting more and more on how things had transpired with Sarah. The shock of discovering her betrayal had left a wound that, while slowly healing, still throbbed from time to time. As our relationship deepened, I began to see just how different things were with her compared to how they had been with Sarah. With Emily, there was no drama, no mind games, no walking on eggshells. Everything felt natural, easy, even the tough conversations. One night, as we were lying in bed, Emily asked me something that caught me off guard. Do you think you'll ever get married again? I hadn't really thought about it, not seriously at least. After everything that had happened with Sarah, the idea of marriage felt like a distant, almost foreign concept. But with Emily, things were different. She made me feel safe, like I could trust her with my heart in a way I hadn't been able to with Sarah. I don't know, I admitted. I guess I haven't really thought about it since, well, you know. She nodded, understanding without me having to say more. I get it. But if you ever do feel ready, just know that I'm here. No pressure, no rush. I'm happy with where we are. Her reassurance meant the world to me. It wasn't that I didn't see a future with Emily, I did. In fact, the more time I spent with her, the more I realized how lucky I was to have found someone like her. But the scars from my past still lingered, and I knew it would take time before I was fully ready to take that leap again. A few months later, Emily and I decided to take a trip together, a weekend getaway to the mountains. It was something we had been talking about for a while, and it felt like the perfect opportunity to disconnect from the world and just enjoy each other's company. As we hiked through the trails, breathing in the fresh mountain air and taking in the stunning views, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the journey I had been on, for the lessons I had learned, and for the incredible woman walking beside me. At the top of one of the peaks, we found a quiet spot to sit and take in the view. Emily leaned against me, her hand in mine, and for a while, we just sat in comfortable silence, letting the beauty of the moment sink in. This is nice, she said softly. I could stay here forever. Me too, I agreed. It feels like everything just makes sense up here. She smiled and looked up at me. You know, I've been thinking about what you said a while ago. About marriage. I raised an eyebrow, curious where this was going. Oh yeah? What about it? I just want you to know, she began, that no matter what happens, I'm in this for the long haul. Whether we get married someday or not, it doesn't matter to me. What matters is that we're happy. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks, but in the best possible way. In that moment, I realized just how much I had been holding on to the fear of getting hurt again, of making the same mistakes I had made with Sarah. But Emily wasn't Sarah. She was different in every way that mattered, and she had proven time and time again that she was in this for the right reasons. I smiled down at her, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. You're amazing, you know that? She grinned. I try. We stayed there for a while longer, watching as the sun began to set behind the mountains, casting a golden glow over the landscape. It was one of those moments that felt perfect, like everything had fallen into place exactly as it was meant to. As we made our way back down the trail, I found myself thinking about the future in a way I hadn't before. Maybe, just maybe, marriage wasn't as far off as I had once thought. But for now, I was content just being with Emily,